beauty of shooting the car exploded is that you just put it back together, polish it, and you're done. The problem with that is that you're going to be really careful doing it, that you don't bruise edges or chip the paint or scratch it in the reassembly process. So many skilled hands help. That's the reason we all use so much tape, and it's the reason we drink so much beer. Ooh, we're almost there. Hey, 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 hey. The body on this car was nearly perfect, other than one wonky spot on the passenger quarter and a tiny rust bubble in front of the wheel arch. A little adjustment and a little new metal. And now it's just down to preparing the panels for paint. Using the fluorescent tube's reflection to see if the panel's straight. It shows me stuff like that that I might miss in the paint job. A little bit wavy right there too. This smooth transition is a nice taper. This tells me that this paint job is stuck very well to the original paint job, and I'm just fine sanding this. Thankfully, this car is pretty straight and there's no rust other than a piece this big. And it's just pretty straightforward. We're gonna sand the paint down and paint on top of it. It's a 10-year-old paint job that is not flaking anywhere, so it's safe to put new paint on top of. And that means we need some supplies. And my go-to spot is Single Source, just up the road from me in Nashville. They have everything a body guy needs to make the paint job perfect. I grabbed some primer, some hardener, some clear coat, some catalyst for the clear coat, and some reducer. Back in the booth, I masked up all the panels. I removed them from the car to paint to make the finished paint job better with less steps. You can do a better job, you can reach the panels easier when you're prepping, and you end up with less time in it. That's a pressure gauge. Since we have an exhaust fan and an input fan, you can balance your pressure and create a positive airflow. First, some epoxy primer over any visible filler or bare metal. I always check the temperature of the metal on the panels, which is much more important than air temperature.
All right, so we're good.
Then it's time for the high build urethane primer. Multiple coats will give me enough material to fine-tune the surface with blocking and sanding. The blocking in these primer coats are the foundation of a perfect paint job. Typically, there's two types of primer that you put on a car. An epoxy primer as a metal sealer that sets it up for whatever comes next on top of it. And then there's a high build primer that is intended to be sanded flat and for the paint to go down on top of. So typically there's two priming sessions. If it's really rough like a corn cob, maybe three. After a few hours of drying time, it's time to correct each panel individually. And it starts with a guide coat so I can see any low spots. Now, I'm starting on my flat zones with 220, and I just want to establish that it's good and straight and flat. I'm using fingertip pressure, letting the grit do the work. Ooh, weirdness right there. It's a little dark, so I'm going to continue working that. Overall, I'm pretty happy. Once finished with the 220, I sprayed the fender with some wax and grease remover to see if it looks good and straight. I'm happy with it, so we blow the dust off. So by sanding off my guide coat with 400, it tells me that my 220 grit scratches are gone. This is what we call wet sanding. So this soft block, if I use a good technique, on a straight panel, I'm not going to do any more damage to it. I'm just going to set it up for the paint to stick properly. And here's how we look at this. If there's still guide coat, there's still 220 grit scratches. So that means more sanding until all those fine scratches are gone. You'll notice I didn't sand this area down here. There's a spoiler that covers that. The bumper covers this. All I'm concerned about with that, because I'm never going to see it with the car assembled, is making sure I've got enough grit so that the paint sticks. The last step is to scuff the entire panel with a gray scuffing pad. The gray pads are less aggressive than the red pads and conform to the shape of the panel. The red scuffing pads are 220 to 400 grit range. The gray scuffing pads are 320 to 600 grit range. One final check with a wax and grease remover. I'm looking at the reflection of the lights in the panel. If the reflection is straight, well, the panel is straight. And that means one panel is ready. One. Rinse and repeat. We've got another 10 panels to do. And we keep on working until it's like this, and then we can put paint on. Paint is the reward for all of this crap that you have to do before paint.